Namaskar, dear viewers. Rather, I should address you all as dear Gandhians, because all of you have logged in today to add a little bit more to your vast knowledge on the Mahatma. I believe that all of us in the independent India carry a little bit of that great soul in ourselves. In that spirit, I'm a Gandhian too. My name is Rajiv Kumar, and I am the High Commissioner of India in Mozambique. Today, I'm going to introduce to all of you through this channel a very prominent Gandhian, Dr. Shobhana Radhakrishna, who is the founder of the Scope Gandhian Forum for Ethical Corporate Governance in India. Dr. Shobhana is an acclaimed international speaker on the philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi and spreads Gandhian ideology by Indian oral tradition of the Katha format. Gandhi Katha narrates the philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi, his ethical leadership, moral and spiritual life, and the environmental credo. The Katha also narrates the learning from Mahatma Gandhi's practices of wellness of body, mind, and spirit for coping up and staying safe physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually during the COVID-19 pandemic. On 2nd October of 1869, a simple man was born in the town of Porbandar in Gujarat, who was destined to change the world we live in today through his constant experiments of truth and non-violence. The simple tools transformed a man called Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi into the Mahatma, a great soul. The Mahatma taught us the meaning of a free world, a world without slavery and apartheid, a world without exploitation, and a world in which we all live with dignity and honor. The simple tools brought curtains over the most powerful British empire of the day on which the sun never set. Mahatma Gandhi did indeed bring the sunset onto the brutality of colonialism. The simple tools of non-violence and satyagraha, embrace of truth, could win the freedom for millions of Indians is the greatest force available to mankind. It is more powerful than the most powerful weapon of destruction devised by human ingenuity. His experiences of truth and non-violence reverberated with Martin Luther King Jr. in the United States, Nelson Mandela in South Africa, and many other leaders in history. On his experiences with truth, he said that the truth-based journey had kept him from succumbing to grief. He also believed that the path of truth was so simple that even a child could follow it. These simple tools are indeed transformational even today. Dear Gandhians, India has been celebrating the 158th anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi since 2nd October 2018. As part of the celebrations, I myself distributed hundreds of Amar Chitra Katha comic books on Mahatma Gandhi among school children of 2 schools in Maputo in October last year. I also distributed solar lamps among college students of universities of Eduardo Mondlane and Pedagogica in Maputo in November-December last year. We are ending the celebrations on 2nd October this year with a Khadi exhibition in Maputo. All of you are welcome to join us in this inauguration, which we are organizing in collaboration with the Indian Cultural Association of Mozambique. I would now like to thank the Indian Cultural Association in Mozambique and especially its president, Sri Nand Kumar Nair, for organizing this virtual Gandhi Katha today as well. Let us now hear the Gandhi Katha by Kathavachka Dr. Shobhana Radhakrishna. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable High Commissioner Shri Rajiv Kumarji, for your kind message. Namaskar and welcome to the Gandhi Katha, story of Mahatma Gandhi, narrated by me during the commemoration of the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, which incidentally is also the 150th birth anniversary of Kasturba Gandhi. I express gratitude to the High Commission of India, Maputo, and to the Indian Cultural Association, Mozambique, for hosting the Gandhi Katha amidst these challenging times to learn from Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy of truth, non-violence, purity of life, his spirituality, his environmental credo, and his practices of health and wellness of body, mind, and spirit for coping up and staying safe physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually during and after the coronavirus COVID 19 pandemic, which has affected the entire humanity. October 2nd, the world celebrates the UN International Day of Nonviolence, and we celebrate it as Gandhi Jayanti in India. The entire world is remembering Mahatma Gandhi, the apostle of peace and nonviolence. We have an opportunity to remind the humanity of the efficacy of the messages of the Mahatma, the father of our nation. I pay my respects to the leading lights of Mozambique and convey my warm wishes to the people of Mozambique and the Indian community in Mozambique who have joined me online today. Gandhi Katha is based on the ancient Indian oral tradition of Katha or storytelling with hymns and narration. I have given talks in Gandhi Katha in 94 countries during the commemoration of the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi in the past 2 years. In all the countries, people have great reverence and respect for Mahatma Gandhi. Many have been inspired by him to take up the cudgels against injustice through nonviolence, and others have followed his environmental credo, and still others have been deeply touched by his simple spiritual life. The humanism of the world's thought leaders are so deeply reflected in Mahatma Gandhi's teachings. The new generation is eager to understand more about the greatest man of the last century who made such a huge impact on humanity and inspired many world leaders. Nelson Mandela was often dubbed as the Gandhi of South Africa, and he had strong Indian connections and striking similarities with India's father of the nation. The anti apartheid icon Madiba had said, and I quote, "The Mahatma is an integral part of our history because it is here that he first experimented with truth, here that he demonstrated his characteristic firmness in pursuit of justice, here that he developed satyagraha as a philosophy and a method of struggle." Gandhiji used to begin and end his day with prayers. These were prayers from all the religions of the world, Sarva Dharma Prarthana. Gandhiji's internal core comprised of the essence of all the religions, one that he had acquired from long study and reflection. The devotional poetry of the saint poets that he had heard, sung, and absorbed since childhood made up a significant part of the life of his soul. He said that ultimately all the religions point to the same truth of compassion, love, forgiveness, and tolerance, and that everyone must study the essence of all the religions in an attitude of perfect reverence and have friendship and respect for the practitioners of different religions and diverse cultures. All of Gandhiji's friends were from different religions and cultural background from around the world, and he actively encouraged friendship across religions. Even after 7 decades of Gandhiji's passing on in every part of the world, his relevance is felt as strongly as ever before, and his visions and actions are of enduring significance for all times and all places. His approach to life was holistic and cannot be divided into watertight compartments of social, religious, political life. Gandhiji stands out as the champion not only of political democracy but also of economic and spiritual democracy in today's world. Gandhiji believed that moral degeneration is the root cause of all evils, including conflicts. This explains his lifelong crusade of attainment of moral values such as honesty, truthfulness, integrity, nonviolence, purity of means, love, compassion, self control, forgiveness, friendliness, mercy, etc. For Gandhiji, satyagraha or nonviolent resistance and civil disobedience was by non cooperation with evil through the moral values of love force, truth force, and soul force. For him, the consideration for the suffering of fellow human beings was of paramount importance. His belief and actions that social change for establishing justice and dignity of humans is both less harmful and more sustainable when achieved by non-violent means stands true to time. His legacy of satyagraha is now widely recognized the world over and is seen in many moments for civil rights nowadays. Mahatma Gandhi's environmental practices were based on conservation of natural resources, which were often misused and overused for the sake of greed. Gandhiji had warned about the unsustainability on the global scale a century ago. Equality for women within the society was a principle Gandhiji passionately believed in. His vision of Sarvodaya, the welfare of all, becomes very relevant in the crisis of internally displaced people and migrants may well have been kept in mind the very basic unit of human organization, a village or a county. His vision of Gram Swaraj, which is self reliant, independent, self governed village built on the premises of sustainable growth, is the need of the hour. According to my understanding, Mahatma Gandhi's life was an epic of faith and endeavor. His faith was in truth, the ultimate reality of truth, and he endeavored to attain it through non-violence throughout his life till the very last breath. Gandhiji's adherence to truth, non-violence, and purity of means has inspired me to give Gandhi Katha so that people can put their hearts into understanding Gandhiji, get inspired to learn from his extraordinary moral and ethical leadership, his simple spiritual life, revolutionary thoughts, actions, his lifelong service to humanity against all forms of injustice, and how he continues to inspire people in all the parts of the globe at all times and in all ages. Perhaps the greatest source of strength for Mahatma Gandhi was in his faith in God. Truth was the deepest and the most complete form of God. The faith gave him the constant awareness that he had to be nothing but an instrument in his hands. He was to go wherever he was led. For him, the guidance of God constituted two things. One, he had to walk on the path enlightened by truth that was available to him in whatever measures and form. That on that path, our great teachers and great people had already walked. Two, he had to constantly gaze inwards and find inspiration through self introspection, self examination, and self purification. And that he did by repeated questioning. And that question was, Ko aham, who am I? What am I? And what is the real purpose of my life? This question has been asked in our ancient Indian civilization since the past 5,000 years. The answer came to him that the purpose of life was to serve others. The deeper the faith, the greater was the endeavor for Mahatma Gandhi. He said, Truth is God, Satya hi Parameshwar hai. Faith in truth led Mahatma Gandhi to two other realizations. If God is omnipresent, then truth is omnipresent too. If each human being were an aspect of God, then each person is capable of being truthful, of being good, and doing good to others. The second realization was that in spite of all the upheavals in the history of humankind, humanity will only progress in an auspicious direction because truth, that is God, is only interested in the welfare of its creation. His endeavor throughout his life was devoted to the search of that element of truth, to awaken it and to nurture it. This is why he could feel oneness with everyone. For most of us, this realization does not set in easily. But because of this understanding of oneness, Gandhiji had no enemies. He did not want to settle scores with anyone, and he did not want to take any revenge. He merely wanted to extend his love, compassion, and respect to everyone. That was one of his traits. He respected individuals as individuals, and that was another trait that we see in Gandhiji. Romeo Rolla, the French writer and pacifist who won the Nobel Prize for Literature, wrote the biography of Mahatma Gandhi in 1924, and people came to know a lot about him in the Western world. In 1931, on his way back from the Second Roundtable Conference in London, Gandhiji went to Switzerland and spent 5 days in Villeneuve, where Romeo Rolla stayed. And Romeo Rolla wrote, and I quote, "This little man is so fragile in appearance, is tireless, and fatigue is a word that does not exist in his vocabulary. He could calmly answer for hours without a muscle of face twitching. His mind proceeds through successive experiments into actions, and he follows a straight line, but he never stops." Now I will play the Gandhi Katha hymn or dhun in Hindi, which elaborates on Gandhiji's definition of truth as having harmony between thoughts, words, and deeds.
मन वाणी कर्म में सत्य ही तू बोल, मन वाणी कर्म में सत्य ही तू बोल, जीवन में मंगल के द्वार दे तू खोल, जीवन में मंगल के द्वार दे तू खोल, ज्ञान कर्म भक्ति का हो सम्यक विधान, ज्ञान कर्म भक्ति का हो सम्यक विधान, सत्य शिव सुंदर का सुमधुर भगवान, सत्य शिव सुंदर का सुमधुर भगवान, मन वाणी कर्म में सत्य ही तू बोल, मन वाणी कर्म में सत्य ही तू बोल, जीवन में मंगल के द्वार दे तू खोल, जीवन में मंगल के द्वार दे तू खोल, ज्ञान कर्म भक्ति का हो सम्यक विधान, ज्ञान कर्म भक्ति का हो सम्यक विधान, सत्य शिव सुंदर का सुमधुर भगवान, सत्य शिव सुंदर का सुमधुर भगवान।
Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy was primarily truth centered. Truth was the first and foremost principle in Gandhian philosophy. Gandhiji's life was a continuous series of experiments with truth. He applied his philosophy to his own life through selfless service and to practical social and political service through his non-violent civil disobedience campaigns, which he termed as Satyagraha. And Satyagraha is his first gift to humanity. For Gandhiji, truth is the relative truth of truthfulness in thought, word, and deed, and the absolute truth, the ultimate reality. The ultimate truth is God, and morality, the moral laws and code, its basis. Non-violence, far from meaning mere peacefulness or the absence of overt violence, is understood by Gandhiji to denote active love. Gandhiji's non-violence stems from two main points. Firstly, if according to the divine reality, all life is one, then all violence committed towards another is violence towards oneself, towards the collective, whole self, and thus self-destructive and counter to the universal law of life, which is love. Secondly, Gandhiji believed that non-violence is the most powerful force in existence. Had violence been superior to non-violence, humankind would long ago have succeeded in destroying itself. The human race certainly could not have progressed as far as it has, even if universal justice remains far off the horizon. From both viewpoints, nonviolence or love is regarded as the highest law of humanity. Another aspect that gave him strength was the clarity that he had acquired from years of experiments and reflection on the philosophical content of Satyagraha. He was clear that Satyagraha was based on the principle of Advaita or non duality. If the same essence of soul encompasses all human beings, it would allow a Satyagrahi to become one with the oppressor. Any failure to touch and reach out to the opponent would be a failure of Satyagrahi and not a shortcoming of the philosophy of Satyagraha. Moreover, with the experience that he had had over the years, he had begun to see love as a very powerful and positive force. The challenge before him was to use this force with effect. The bigger the challenge, the more enthused Gandhiji was by it. Gandhiji realized that untruth, injustice, oppression, and tyranny last only as long as their victims accept them. The moment one learns to say no to untruth and injustice, their edifice collapses immediately. This was true for the political, the economic, and the social order. Mahatma Gandhi is the greatest apostle of peace the world has seen in the recent past. His notion of peace is focused on tolerance, forgiveness, compassion, oneness, truth force, love force, and soul force. Albert Einstein, the greatest scientist of the first half of the 20th century, had called Mahatma Gandhi as the supreme practical leader for change. And he said, and I quote, I believe that Gandhi's views were the most enlightened of all the political men in our time. We should strive to do things in his spirit, not to use violence in fighting for our cause, but by non participation in anything you believe is evil. Gandhiji was the conscience keeper of humanity. That his ideas will be an inspiration to us both as individuals and as a society is beyond any doubt. He was an epoch maker, one who could sow the seeds for the next generation from the fruits of the previous one. He is the most powerful visionary and a practical idealist from the first half of the last century, whose life is a role model for all of us. But the effort has to begin from a point where you are standing. That is what made all Mahatma Gandhi's idealist actions practical, and he can be truly called a man of action. But it does not only mean that he was very busy. That, of course, he was. What we mean is the action of putting ideas or beliefs into practice more than anything else was the driving force in his life. The answer for Mahatma Gandhi was always found in action. He had said, an ounce of practice is worth more than tons of preaching. But if you want to understand Gandhiji, you will have to understand him not only with the intellect, but also from the emotional part of you and from his acts, from his life. Usually, people see him from different perspectives. Some people think that Gandhiji mostly is a politician, but at the same time, some would think of him as a saint. And there are others who will think of Gandhiji as a nation builder. He may be all this, but I think when we consider Gandhiji, we have to try and find out what is the common stream in all these different aspects of life that you see in his personality. One was the commitment to values, and the second one was efficiency in the kind of work that he did. This is part of his comprehensiveness, and there was a unique mixture of, for example, enthusiasm on one hand and patience on the other. He has made significant and seminal contributions that span across such disciplines as economics, spirituality, conflict resolution, international peace, civil rights, education, politics, and much more. At that time, the most harmful and destructive impact on the world was that of imperialism, violence, war, materialism, and the greed for controlling the world. Mahatma Gandhi had advised to shun these seven social sins in his speech on October 22nd, 1925. Politics without principle, wealth without work, commerce without ethics, knowledge without character, pleasure without conscience, science without morality, worship without sacrifice. In my opinion, Gandhiji's life left the most powerful and strong imprint on the humanity of the world. He had said, "My life is my message," and that life was so transparent and open that anyone can pick up from anywhere and learn from him. John Haynes Holmes was a pacifist, anti war activist, and the founder of American Civil Liberties Union. He had met Gandhiji in London in 1931 and later on traveled to India and met him again in 1947. He found Mahatma Gandhi's presence, those bright eyes shining through his spectacles, his voice so clear and yet so gentle, his whole presence so simple and yet so strong. He said, and I quote, "I believe that he is unquestionably the greatest man living in the world today. And when I think of Gandhi, I think of Jesus Christ." I will play the Gandhi Katha dhun in Hindi about Gandhiji's philosophy of truth, non-violence, and purity of means that came together in the form of Satyagraha.
अहिंसा से सत्याग्रह सीखा, सत्य अहिंसा से सत्याग्रह सीखा, सर्व प्रकार के भय का मोचन, सर्व प्रकार के भय का मोचन, सत्य अहिंसा में मन मेरा मगन, लागे लगन, सत्य अहिंसा में मन मेरा मगन, सत्य अहिंसा में मन मेरा मगन।
Time magazine had listed out three most important protests over 190 years. The first one was the Boston Tea Party. The second one was the Dandi March or Salt Satyagraha. And the third one was the March of Washington. We can see a common thread. The first and second were against the same company, the East India Company. And there is a common thread of non-violence in all three protests. In 1930, with a pinch of salt, Mahatma Gandhi shook the world. He started out on 12th March from his Sabarmati ashram in Ahmedabad in Gujarat for Dandi, the seashore town, with 79 fellow marchers. Walked for 24 days, walking 10 miles a day. Stopped at 48 villages, giving speeches morning and evening. He covered 241 miles till he reached Dandi seashore on 5th April. In the early morning hours of 6th April, when he picked up a fistful of muddy lump of earth with salt, 100,000 people joined him, and towards the end of the campaign, 300,000 people had broken the salt law all over India. 1,362 newspapers covered the news. The American journalist William Lawrence Shearer was present during the Salt Satyagraha, and his graphic reporting brought the incidents to the notice of the world. So Mahatma Gandhi remains the most powerful global brand ambassador, a youth icon who stood up against injustice, an apostle of peace and nonviolence, a man whose values can make the world a better place today. In 1904, in South Africa, after reading John Ruskin's book Unto This Last, Barrister Mohandas Gandhi transformed his life overnight and started leading a community life of self control, voluntary poverty, bread labor, and sarvodaya, welfare of all. He established 4 ashrams in his lifetime, 2 in South Africa, called the Phoenix Settlement, which he established in 1904, and the Tolstoy Farm in 1910, and 2 ashrams in India, Sabarmati Ashram in Ahmedabad in Gujarat in 1917, and the Sevagram Ashram in Wardha, Maharashtra in 1936. Here, Kasturba Gandhi and Mahatma Gandhi, along with the ashram community, lived in poverty like the common villagers of India. These ashrams were his ideals of a non-violent face-to-face society for Sarvodaya, the welfare of all, and carrying out constructive programs, which is his second gift to humanity. Gandhiji's ashrams had a mingling of political and spiritual aims. It was a practical laboratory for transforming ordinary men and women into extraordinary seekers and satyagrahis for offering the highest sacrifice in the freedom struggle on one hand, and to get involved in constructive programs to serve the poorest of the poor by establishing their self respect and dignity. I'm happy to inform you that I was born in his last ashram in Sevagram. My father was inspired by Gandhiji since his childhood and joined the non-violent freedom struggle in India and lived in the Sevagram ashram even after Gandhiji passed on in 1948. For more than 5 decades, my parents and all of us have continued to walk on the path that Gandhiji has shown to humanity. The life and thoughts of Mahatma Gandhi are intertwined and inseparable. His politics was imbued with his spiritual experiments, and his spirituality was tempered by his vision of a non-violent society, and his constructive program was integral to his politics. The unique practices of Mahatma Gandhi, his control of palate, his fasts, his spinning, his silence, and his prayers gave him the internal strength, and they were as much a part of his politics as of his spiritual life. And these practices and experiments have been sustained and nurtured by the inmates of the ashrams that he had founded. The ashram community, through its own practices, affirmed, modified, and validated Mahatma Gandhi's ideals and practices and continues to do so even till today. This shows the relevance of his practices. Gandhiji carried out his experiments in health and wellness through nature cure, diet control, hydrotherapy, sunbath, mud pack, and observing silence for one whole day. And all these experiments were carried on in the ashram. Our friend and the British Quaker, Sir Horace Alexander, stayed in both the ashrams, and he noticed that the bell used to ring 56 times in the daytime. He said, and I quote, Gandhiji had wonderful courtesy and punctuality. I was to learn quickly that he was the slave of watch. He had more to do in every 24 hours than almost any other man. So he had learned how to pack the most into every minute. Yet, he never gave the impression of being hurried and impatient. Gandhiji has given three gifts to humanity. And the first one, as I said, is Satyagraha. The second one is constructive programs. And the third one is Ekadasha Vrata, or the 11 observances, which were a set of rules for the ashram community for spiritual progress and voluntary self control. Ivan Illich, the Croatian Austrian philosopher, had come to Sevagram ashram in 1980. He spent a week in the ashram and every day he used to sit in Bapu Kuti or Gandhiji's cottage, which was a very simple structure made from the locally available material. And he said, and I quote, "The hut of Mahatma Gandhi demonstrates to the world how the dignity of the common man can be brought up. It is also a symbol of happiness, which we can derive from practicing the principles of simplicity, service, and truthfulness." Now I will play the Gandhi Katha dhun, which explains Gandhiji's philosophy of truth, that is God.
आंखें पवित्र राख सत्य ही तू बोल, आंखें पवित्र राख सत्य ही तू बोल, ईश्वर साक्षात होंगे अंतर टटोल, ईश्वर साक्षात होंगे अंतर टटोल, सत्य ही है परमेश्वर बापू का बोल, सत्य ही है परमेश्वर बापू का बोल, उसी परमेश्वर की नित्य कर तू शोध, उसी परमेश्वर की नित्य कर तू शोध, आंखें पवित्र राख सत्य ही तू बोल, आंखें पवित्र राख सत्य ही तू बोल, ईश्वर साक्षात होंगे अंतर टटोल, ईश्वर साक्षात होंगे अंतर टटोल, ईश्वर साक्षात होंगे अंतर टटोल।
Though Gandhiji's role and contributions to the political arena are well known, what is less known is his contribution towards health and well being. Gandhiji was a firm believer in the principle that a healthy mind keeps the body healthy, and he stressed the importance of a healthy lifestyle and positive thinking. His interest in health, hygiene, nutrition, and diseases was as great as his interest in politics. He insisted that adopting preventive measures for diseases was much better than treatment. He also said that it was important to focus on cleanliness, a controlled diet, and an exercise regimen, and that it was best to avoid overconsumption of medicines, especially those that were not required. He was also a firm believer of nature cure and conducted experiments related to diet and fasting. He always believed that it was important to understand what caused diseases and then remove that very cause rather than falling ill again and again and then attempting to treat it with excessive medication. Gandhiji was essentially a man of science. He approached problems in a scientific manner. Mahatma Gandhi's message to the world on the vital question of health and well being is very important. To him, the study of this question was part of the service to God and His creation, which was His mission. Knowing to care summed up his life. His message was simple and easy to follow. It encouraged everyone to respect simplicity, voluntary self control, reduce the wants, follow the tradition, cultural practices, the values, follow the environmental credo, treat oneself through nature cure for living in harmony with nature. He was very interested in health and wellness and remained ever vigilant about his own health as well as of others. He said that our lifestyle should be such that we should not let any disease come anywhere near us. And every person is responsible for looking after his or her body, mind, and spirit impeccably. He advised that in order for keeping physically, mentally, and spiritually healthy, we should have perfect understanding of our bodies, which are made up of the five elements that are found in nature. And that is what has been told by our ancient seers and sages of India. And these five elements are air, water, fire, earth, and space. For the wellness of our bodies, the balance and harmony between all these five elements is necessary. For Gandhiji, the outside universe was but a reflection of the inside universe. He repeated time and again that the universe is compressed in the atom. There is not one law for the atom and another for the universe. It was based on his actual spiritual experience that gave him the conviction that the moral principles have no meaning unless they can be made to serve as the guide of conduct in the daily affairs of man. The Sanskrit proverb says, Yatha pinde tatha brahmande. You are the universe within the universe. As with the self, so is the universe. What is going on within you is same as what is going on in the universe. Enveloping ourselves in the rhythms and forms of nature can be transformative and healing. Ayurveda, the ancient healing tradition of India, recommends spending time in nature every day. Doing so allows us to experience the wonderment of this existence with all our senses. Nature allows us to shift our attention beyond the domain of our ego and to recognize that we are all inextricably connected to the universe. From the body mind perspective, Gandhiji's standpoint was that health is an optimal integration of body, mind, and soul, and environment. Environment is our extended body. There is a nice Vedic expression from the ancient traditions of India which says, as is the atom, so is the universe. As is the microcosm, so is the macrocosm. As is the universal body, so is the cosmic body. As is the universal mind, so is the cosmic mind. Yoga and meditation integrates all components of health, and Gandhiji was a strong believer in nature cure, living in harmony with nature, following the environmental credo of recycling, reusing, reducing, and refusing, Ayurveda, and practiced Ashtanga Yoga as well. His experiments with nature cure were always on himself. He also advised his friends and disciples to follow these remedies and treated and cured 30,000 patients through nature cure. Dr. Sherwood Eddy was a leading American Protestant missionary, prolific writer, and educator who visited Gandhiji in the Sabarmati ashram in 1929. And he wrote that Gandhiji's bodily presence is like that of Apostle Paul or Socrates. He impressed us as the most childlike, the most transparent, the most lovable of man. His whole character is centered in his unique passion in truth and reality. Gandhiji was the first environmentalist much before the world was preoccupied with the crisis of environment and ecology. And with his stunning premonition and knowledge, he had declared that the earth has enough for man's needs, but not for man's greed. Greed will be the main reason for the environmental degradation and the ecological crisis he had predicted almost a century ago. He had also said that the earth, the air, the land, and the water are not an inheritance from our forefathers, but on loan from our children. So we have to hand it over to them as it was handed over to us. Very few people also know that as a couple, Gandhiji and Kasturba Gandhi contributed immensely 123 years ago to public health emergencies as frontline workers treating the patients in the service of humanity. During the Second Anglo-Boer War from 1899 to 1902 and in the Zulu uprising of 1906 in South Africa, Barrister Mohandas Gandhi established the Natal Indian Ambulance Corps along with 300 free Indians and 800 Indian indentured labor, and they served as stretcher bearers. In the bubonic plague outbreak in Johannesburg in 1904, he and his wife Kasturba Gandhi rushed to help the Indian indentured labor, quarantined the patients in an empty godown after scrubbing, cleaning, and sanitizing the place, and treated some of them through nature cure. Gandhiji and Kasturba Gandhi returned to India in 1915, and in 1918 there was this outbreak of the Spanish influenza pandemic. Gandhiji opened up his Sabarmati ashram as a quarantine center and treated and served patients through nature cure, provided simple vegetarian diet to boost immunity, and maintained physical distancing. Gandhiji and Kasturba Gandhi took care of the families of the patients, looked after their physical, mental, and spiritual needs, gave them correct information, and taught them to be positive through prayers, meditation, and recitation of Ramanama, and taking care of each other during the time of the Spanish flu pandemic. Gandhiji had said on 10th November 1918, our ancestors could build such tough bodies in the past. But today, we are reduced to a state of miserable weakness and are easily infected by noxious germs moving about in the air. There is one and only one really effective way by which we can save ourselves from them, even in our present broken state of health. That way is the way of self restraint, sanyam, and of imposing a limit on our acts, wants, and desire. From 1906 onwards, Gandhiji had been writing quite regularly about his experiments with nature cure and dietetics. In 1906, he wrote a couple of articles in the Indian Opinion newspaper titled Guide to Health, which became very popular because he was evolving at that time and still experimenting on himself. In 1942, in India, Gandhiji wrote the book Key to Health, in which he wrote that anyone who observes the rules of health mentioned in this book will find that he has got in it a real key to unlock the gates leading him to health. He will not need to knock at the doors of doctors or Vaidyas or the traditional health practitioners from day to day. This book of Gandhiji had become very, very popular, and it was translated in many Indian languages, and it found its way to the West, and there it had been translated in many languages. And that is one of the most important book which one can read to learn more about it. Today, the world is facing three kinds of crisis globally. First is the COVID-19 pandemic, which is causing immense physical stress, sickness, death, fear of death, and existential crisis. The second is the serious and long drawn financial crisis, which is also causing physical and mental anguish. And the third one is the ecological crisis, which has impacted everyone. We have to look for answers somewhere within ourselves while learning from the life of Gandhiji, who had said, my life is my message, so there is so much to learn. The lesson the pandemic is teaching is very simple. When one member of the family falls sick, the entire family is affected, and soon the community is affected, the nation is affected, and then other communities in other nations in this globalized world. The well being of one individual has an impact on people on the other side of the globe. This is true of every action of ours. What we eat, what we buy, what we think, and what we do has reverberations and repercussions on all life on earth. It is this anubandha, this interconnectedness that sustains all life on earth. We are all in this together as one human family, as brothers and sisters. Whether we choose to see it or not, we live on the same planet Earth. That's our only home, the Mother Earth. Our ancient sages and seers from India have always looked upon us as Vishwamanava, global citizens, and said that the world is one family, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The current COVID 19 pandemic is a wake up call for every country, big or small, rich or poor, developed or developing. It has opened our eyes to the fragility of the existence of humans. We will have to learn to live with COVID 19 now and in the future as well. Instead of reinventing a new lifestyle, we just have to get inspired from the life of Gandhiji to make the necessary changes in thoughts, actions, and conduct for coping up physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And this is the future that the coronavirus COVID 19 pandemic is pointing out to us if we observe carefully. Many lessons are very clear, and some are still unknown, surrounding us in uncertainty. This uncertainty is causing mental stress, anxiety, existential crisis, fear of extinction and death. And the mass psychology of living in depression and grief is pointing out towards this fact in the current pandemic. We are collectively grieving for the loss of our known lifestyle. But if we still return to the normal standard of finding happiness by chasing after money, power, position, lifelong consumerism, then COVID 19 has given us the wake up call. This kind of lifestyle of empty consumerism and mass distractions has only increased the difference between the rich and the poor, created the huge carbon footprint, increased the misery of the invisible masses everywhere in the world. When a crisis makes you feel stressed, meditation, prayer, and chanting relieves the stress response. Fear and anxiety are forms of stress that becomes exaggerated when events become uncertain, when you feel a loss of control over the situation. And when the stress keeps repeating itself without let up, the thinking mind reacts to all these conditions. It always has, even in normal times, but a crisis brings stress into high relief, making it more capable of lowering the immune system of our body and causing inflammatory diseases. Decades ago, stress was classified as epidemic of modern life. The Gandhian way of life is the best guide to practicing the coping mechanism that induces relaxation, calmness, inner peace, absence of anxiety, and how to remain positive. Therefore, Gandhiji comes out as the greatest healer and the wellness guru who comes free of cost. Gandhian principles of freedom from fear and care for all is a perfect prescription in the times of crisis. Gandhiji's emphasis on healthy lifestyle, empowerment for self-care, and care in the community would make perfect sense. I once again take this opportunity to thank the Indian Mission, the Indian Cultural Association for hosting the Gandhi Katha. My special thanks are to all of you who have joined me online today. I will end with the peace benediction in Sanskrit for the universal welfare. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah, Sarve Santu Niramayaha, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschit Dukha Bhag Bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Let all be happy. Let all be healthy. Let all experience auspiciousness. Let no one be overwhelmed by grief. Om Peace, peace, peace. With Gandhiji's blessings, who had said that peace is the only positive force which will lead us from darkness towards light, I will end the Gandhi Katha with the hymn or dhun Shubha Mangal Ho. May they be auspicious good. May they be good.
Mangal Be